Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. And what a lovely story we have tonight. We're on part 3 of our story, and we've discovered that a young woman called Candy went into prison for something she didn't do. She was set up by a woman who was extremely jealous of her called Becca, and she's now come out of prison. But let's see where this story is going to take us, because I've got a feeling that we're going to have a Bigfoot encounter sooner or later. But before we do, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Click the notification bell and the thumbs up. And let's continue with part 3 of our story tonight.
I have to say, Candy, I do agree with your mother on this one,
said Mr. Seacourt soberly.
I think that there are people out there that have no emotional response to the travesties they commit. So if you wire such people up to a lie detector test, they may effortlessly defeat it. Most people's lies are obviously exposed on a polygraph test, which is why they're usually reliable. But like many things in life, nothing is ever completely foolproof. I wonder if Becca were to take that polygraph test today, whether she would pass it. And somehow I think she would, because that woman lacks any kind of emotional response. She has no guilt about anything that she's done. I hasten to say that she did look as guilty as hell when your mother confronted her in the supermarket that day. She certainly didn't appreciate being ambushed. She knows what she did, though. As far as I'm concerned, karma will get her one of these days. Of that I'm most sure.
You really think that, Dad? Asked Candy, looking doubtful. Do you know something? I don't agree with you on this one. I so wish I did. It would be reassuring. But I'm afraid I don't think that a person like Becca will ever get her just desserts. I think life can be a bitch. That's what I think. I certainly learnt that in prison.
What do you mean by that, love?
Asked her father, his eyes looking somewhat melancholic.
Well, I suppose after spending a stint in prison like you did, in such a depressing, soul-destroying place, I imagine it's quite easy for you to be cynical, especially when you learn the law isn't always on your side, even when you so happen to be innocent. I'm not surprised you've lost heart. But I think one of these days Becca will have a rude awakening. In fact, I'm pretty sure of it.
It's nice of you to say that, Dad, and I wish I had your resolute faith, but I'm afraid I just don't. I just think in this world there are some intrinsically evil people out there that get away with their insidious crimes. Look at politicians, for example, and world leaders. They get away with some seriously evil stuff because of who they are. Not to mention the globalists Mum was mentioning earlier, with the nefarious agendas they have, which make you really wonder who is actually running the world. I mean, let's not kid. Becca is well connected. Her father's brother knows people of great influence, like High Court judges, and the list goes on. He knows some of the movers and shakers, the people of influence in this world. So let's just say Becca will likely get away with her unspeakable evil acts until the end of never, and never ever be made accountable for them. I mean, look at the way the police handled my case. Despite the fact I protested my innocence and passed all my polygraph tests, it was like they'd already decided I was guilty of accidentally pushing Larry over the edge of the cliff in a fit of unbridled rage. I'd like to know what we were actually fighting about that day. They can't even tell me that. Nobody bothers to question how Becca and Angie both so happened to be walking up the cliff that me and Larry were exploring on that day. It's a remarkable coincidence, if you ask me, that they just so happened to be at the very same place and time as me and Larry were, don't you think? I've never been a believer in coincidences, but I remember when I was being interrogated by the police, they kept telling me to admit what I had done, to admit that I'd pushed him over the cliff's edge. They never believed my story, not for a second.
I know, love, said Mrs. Seacourt, rubbing her daughter's hand affectionately. Why are we going over this now? I thought we said we were going to draw a line in the sand and discuss this no more. All it's doing is making us upset. What's the point? Just thinking about what Becca did is ruffling up my feathers considerably. And let's just say if I was to run into her right now, I'd run off my mouth again. You don't want to give Becca the satisfaction of dwelling on how she set you up that day, to make you pay for a crime you never committed. I know, love, that life is not fair, and you've been dealt a lousy set of cards. But the cards have been reshuffled again, have they not? And my bet now is you've got a promising hand, so the game of your life is going to be kinder to you in the future. Of that I'm sure. The main thing we need to focus on now is the here and now. That's all that matters after all. I apologize for bringing this all up. This is all my fault. You didn't come out of prison to be reminded of all this stuff, did you? But I couldn't help myself. I had to bring it up. What on earth is wrong with me?
Ma'am, nothing's wrong with you. I'm actually glad you brought it up. I'm glad we talked about it. I think it's quite healing to let out your feelings and frustrations. So even though I don't like talking about what Becca did to me, I think I can move on from here.
Good. I'm very glad to hear it, love, said Mrs. Seacourt, looking heartily relieved. I guess I brought the whole sorry saga up again, because I wanted to warn you that there's a very strong possibility you could potentially run into Becca in town, like I did on that very unfortunate day. My advice to you is to ignore her completely. Don't give her the satisfaction of observing that she's caused you any distress whatsoever. I don't want her to think your incarceration for a crime you never committed has distressed you in any way. Somehow I believe she'd get off on that. Let her see you living your life to the fullest. Let her see that you've moved on from your stint in prison, and that anything she did to you is water off a duck's back as far as you're concerned. She's the kind of person that would not be happy to see you moving on with your life and being positive about the future. She wants you to be utterly miserable. So if you happen to bump into her by chance, I want you to look as if you're the most contented person on the face of the earth, and that going to prison was no skin off your nose at all. That would certainly succeed in ruffling her feathers more than anything else. People like her don't want other people to be happy. It's not in their DNA. Your mother's right, Candy. Don't give Becca the satisfaction of knowing how much upset she caused you. That would make her extremely happy. Just be indifferent and aloof towards her. That's what I say.
Dad, are you being serious? Do you know how hard it is to be indifferent towards someone who managed to get me locked up because of her connections and insanely good acting ability? Which means she got away with murder. She was the one that pushed Larry over the edge of the cliff that day. But she gets away with it. How can that even be remotely right? I was in prison, eating slop, feeling miserable, grieving the loss of Larry. I was doing time for her. If the truth was out, she'd be locked up for life, wouldn't she? But no chance of that.
I know, my darling, this is not an ideal world, is it? Life is not fair, and the justice system is far from perfect. Me and your father agreed on that a long time ago. Sometimes it's who you know rather than what you know. As I keep saying, my advice to you is to ignore Becca. I really do believe it's a good idea. Don't have any interaction with her whatsoever. But also it's significantly important for her to see you living a full and very happy, abundant life. Nothing will niggle her more than that. It'll be your way of getting back at her, without actually doing anything.
I suppose you're right, said Candy. I will try my best to ignore her. Can I have some more of those pancakes before they get too cold? I need something sweet to eat after engaging in such a sour conversation.
But of course, darling, help yourself to as many pancakes as you like. How does it feel to be back at home in the kitchen with us eating pancakes like the good old days? Remember, we used to eat pancakes every Sunday morning like clockwork.
I remember, Mum, and it's wonderful to be back, it really is. But as I was saying, I'm going around in a little bit of a blur, trying to adjust to my newfound freedom, if you know what I mean. It still doesn't feel altogether real being back home.
But of course it doesn't, darling. It's an adjustment, isn't it? You're used to the prison system. It's like if you take a journey in a long-haul flight somewhere. Even when you get to your other destination with a different time zone, it takes a long time to adjust. And I imagine in prison, with the lack of privacy and stolen independence, well, that couldn't have been easy for you. So having all this free time to yourself, well, it's a whole new experience for you, is it not? But you'll adjust soon enough. I can promise you of that. Me and your father, I'll have you know, argued when you were soon to come out of prison about whether we should refurbish your bedroom or not. I wanted to redecorate it all for you. I was looking at paint colours, wallpapers and new furnishings and getting very excited about everything. I wanted to make your room look spectacular when you arrived home. I wanted to take down some of that dated stuff on your wall, like that dreadful collage of your college friends. But your father was dead set against it. He said that after a stint spent in prison, you'd want to get back to familiarity, because that is what would be comforting to you. We threw a dice on it, would you believe? And your father won, so he got his way.
For the record, Dad's actually right, Mum. I'd hate you to have redecorated my bedroom, even though I'm sure it would have been a very nice gesture on your part, a very thoughtful thing for you to do. I think familiarity is very important for me right now, so getting back to my bedroom was very comforting for me. It was as if it was waiting for me, just the way I left it, and that meant the world to me.
Well, I guess that makes perfect sense, love. I know many youngsters your age are often in a rush to leave home. And I guess if you hadn't been in prison for 5 years, you'd probably have an apartment of your own by now. More's the pity that you've missed out on so much. It really breaks my heart, you know. I'm not sure many 30-year-olds would appreciate living with their parents, but I suppose you're stuck with us for the time being. I guess you haven't really got much of an option, until one day you can afford your own apartment and find a suitable job that fits your skill set. But as far as I'm concerned, I'd love you to stay here with us forever and ever. But you do what you want to do, love. It's your life, and the choices are endless now that you are free. And I know that whatever happens, me and your father will always have your back. But I'm sure you know that already.
Thanks, Mum. Sooner or later I will move out and buy my own apartment, or rent it, so to speak. But right now, I need to focus on finding my bearings, and I'm going to enjoy living with the both of you. It might surprise you to know that I'm not in a terrible rush to leave home. Home is the only place where I feel I really and truly belong. I still feel as if I've been cast adrift at sea for about 5 years now. So now that I'm home, well, my knees are a bit wobbly and shaky, but boy am I glad to be back.
Of course your knees are wobbly and shaky, love. What an excellent way to put it. And of course you're going to feel a little disorientated for a long while. But don't you dare go comparing yourself to other women your own age, who never ever spent 5 years in prison like you did. You need to take your time in deciding what it is you want to do with your life. I think being in prison has actually made you become disconnected to nature. I'm sure it does that to everyone. So you need to spend some quality time out of doors. Because you've been deprived of that for so long, have you not? I think you should take your time getting close to nature, because that is so healing. It's wise for you to relax for the time being, don't you think? Adjusting to change does take time. Your mother's right about that, but then again your mother's right about so many things. I would take things slowly if I was you. 1 step at a time, sweetheart.
Well, I'm going to do that for sure. I think you're both right on that. Candy was glad to be out of prison, of course she was, and it was extremely good to be back in Stowe, Vermont, which is known for its picturesque setting in the Green Mountains. During her incarceration, she had made many friends, but being back home, well, there was nothing sweeter in this world than that. But her parents were absolutely right. It would take a significant amount of adjustment, being home again. She was still nervously looking over her shoulder, as if she was expecting to be arrested again. She knew that being innocent of a crime never guaranteed you would acquire a get-out-of-jail-free card. She was pleased to have learnt her mother had engaged in an altercation with Becca at Walmart. Her mother had told Becca she knew that she'd been the one who had killed Larry Kubek. So that was a relief. She was also happy to learn that people in town did not believe that Becca was telling the truth about what had happened that fateful day. Even Angie, who had backed up Becca's testimony, was now reported to saying it had been so traumatizing seeing Larry Kubek being flung over the cliff's edge that actually she couldn't remember what had happened at all, as the details for her had all suddenly become conveniently, alarmingly vague. Maybe there would be no earthly justice for Becca, but one day she might meet her maker. Then she'd have some explaining to do. Becca might be able to fool the authorities with her extravagantly fictitious proclamations, but she'd never be able to fool God, and that delicious thought was very reassuring to Candy. I'll forgive her, she told herself silently. Not for Becca's sake, of course, but for my own sanity. But forget? Absolutely not. I'll never, ever forget. But I will take Mum's advice and do my best to pretend that Becca doesn't live in our small town at all. And if I do so happen to run into her by accident, I'll look happy and content, and in the process I'll hopefully annoy her. She doesn't want to see me out of prison, having a good time, does she? In the weeks that followed after Candy had been released from prison, she was surprised by the welcome she received from many of the locals. Over and over again people stopped her in the street, reassuring her that they did not trust Becca's account with what had happened on that day, that Larry Quebec fell off the cliff to his death, for in their eyes things just did not add up. "We're so very glad you're back home," she was told again and again. "I do hope Becca gets dealt with sooner or later, and the truth comes out." Candy had been enjoying a social life, and one evening at a bar in town, where she'd met some of her girlfriends for a casual drink, she had sensed that somebody was watching her. She turned around briefly, and that was when she observed a familiar figure staring at her for a brief moment through cold, hard, and hostile eyes. Candy realized to her astonishment that it was Becca, and the hatred the woman exuded towards Candy was so palpable that it almost went through her like an electric drill. It would seem Becca had not changed at all. She wore her brown hair away from her face in a messy ponytail, and her twig-like body, which was rumoured to be extremely strong, looked both pinched and emaciated, for it was a well-known fact that Becca watched everything she ate like a hawk, and avoided sugar at all costs as if it was the plague, which was why some people claimed she was so sour, for nothing sweet had passed her lips in a decade. Some people believed if she ate a bit of chocolate, it might actually have an impact on melting her hardened heart and sweetening her up a little bit. But that really was wishful thinking on their parts. As Becca stared across the bar at Candy, she gave her a dagger look, while her nostrils flared, and for a brief moment she really did look like a treacherously dangerous dog, snarling at her contemptuously, as if getting ready to launch an attack on her. Surprise, surprise, standing next to Becca was Angie, who looked like Becca's poodle, who was willing to do her every bidding. The poor young woman lived in Becca's shadow, as if Becca was part of her identity. When Angie saw Candy in the bar, at least she had the good grace to look somewhat bashful. She knew she had treasonously lied in court to get Candy incarcerated, to appease her very best friend. The two women scuttled out of the bar as quickly as they could, and were gone. But it was poignantly clear to Candy that Becca was not remotely happy she was back home. Lisa, who had always been a good friend of Candy's, had also seen the murderous look that Becca had given Candy, and it had unsettled her so much that she was physically shaking like a leaf, despite the fact that she'd knocked back a couple of glasses of white wine. "Oh, my God! I saw the look Becca gave you, Candy. If looks could physically kill, Becca was wearing that look. She looks furious, doesn't she? Absolutely incensed. She's not remotely happy you're out of prison, and she doesn't like it that you're having a good time with us in the bar, and that you're now a free woman. Why on earth does Becca have so much hate in that heart of hers, I wonder?" "I hadn't actually thought of it like that," said Candy. "Do you know, all this time I've been thinking, when is Becca going to have her just desserts? When is the karma going to come after her for what she did to me? But you know something, Lisa? Becca is the most miserable person I've ever met. She probably is already in hell, based on how much hate and jealousy there is in her heart. Think about it for a moment. How much joy is there in your life if you live with so much hatred?" "You're right. Her hatred must be her karma," said Lisa. "Why hadn't I thought about it before? Becca has never been remotely happy. She gets miserable when she sees people enjoying themselves. She's happy when people suffer. So actually she's the one who's locked herself up in a prison of her own making, due to her malicious, vengeful thoughts. It's like a prison that she can't escape, until she changes her attitudes, of course. But she'll never do that. She's her own worst enemy, is she not? Apart from being social and meeting up with old friends, Candy was resolutely determined to spend some quality time in nature. Maybe in a year's time she'd find a job and do something constructive with her life. But for the time being, life was about living a little, and she wanted to reacquaint herself with the natural world again. She felt as if she was looking at life through a sparkling, brand new lens. For every flower, every blade of grass, along with the cornflower blue sky, was so incredibly spectacular to her, more than they'd ever been to her before her incarceration. So her appreciation of both flavours, tastes, sights and sounds was exponential in every sense of the word. She seriously hoped with the passing of time she'd not lose her appreciation of nature. She never ever wanted to take her life for granted again, and yet even a few weeks after being free from her incarceration, she still had to pinch herself to assure herself that she really was a free woman, and that the police would not come knocking at her door to arrest her again for something she'd never done. What had happened to her made her wonder how many innocent people had been locked up in jail for things they had not done, while the guilty perpetrator was out there living a free life. Candy could see the transformations to her mental, psychological and physical well-being, for nothing had been more healing for her than the natural world. Every day she made a conscientious effort to take a bicycle ride down a mountain trail that she used regularly. Of course, all the exercise had brought out aches and pains in her body, from the muscles she hadn't used for an awfully long period of time. But soaking in a hot bath of Epsom salts mixed with juniper essential oil had alleviated all the pain. These days there was a rosy colour in her cheeks, and certainly a skip to her step. She had never felt better. When Candy arrived on the woodland trail like she did every morning, she'd chain her bicycle up in the car park and proceed along her way. She'd sometimes encounter visiting tourists or locals taking some brisk exercise along the trail. She'd give them a friendly nod, but on this particular bounteous, beautiful day, it was like the world was her oyster. It was so pleasantly calm and serene in the woodgrove. The sun trickled through the canopy of the trees, casting its prism of shadowy light over everything, so the mixed variety of green shades, along with the pretty woodland flowers themselves, were incredibly beautiful to behold, and Candy found herself absorbing everything with a keen enthusiasm. The forest was filled with the cheerful tweets of the bird-song, and their tuneful chorus could not help but bring a smile to her face. Candy was delighted to observe that she hadn't stumbled onto anyone on the trail. That happens sometimes, when no one appeared to be taking any exercise, and this was one of those days. The forest was so serene, so incredibly peaceful, and Candy was loving every minute of her brisk walk. Soon on the trail she arrived at the small stream that she knew so very well. She sat down on a rock to stare out at the silvery water. There were trees draping their branches over the water's edge, almost in a teasing kind of gesture. There was an outcrop of rocks in the stream, where fast, ebullient moving water flowed over the rocks. But on this part of the stream that Candy liked very much, the water was deep and seemed somewhat still. She had swum here often enough as a young girl, and suddenly she was hit with an insatiable urge to swim again. But what if she got into the water stark naked, and then someone stumbled across her by chance along the trail? It might be an awkward, uncomfortable moment for her, if she was caught swimming naked in the water. But when Candy had been in prison, her self-consciousness had taken a cruel beating. For in prison your modesty has no place in your life, as Candy had to endure the insufferable discomfort of communal showers with other women, and being watched by female prison guards. Sometimes she had been cruelly subjected to what she considered to be humiliating searches by prison guards, checking to see whether in her private parts she was hiding some kind of narcotic. It had been very embarrassing. Being in prison, especially for someone like Candy, who by nature was a private person, but in prison there was nowhere for you to hide, for everything was rudely on display for the prison guards to see, and sometimes it wasn't pretty. She reasoned with herself if she stumbled on a stranger who caught her skinny dipping in the stream, all well and good. She'd been locked away for 5 years, for goodness sake. Why not chance it now? Candy leaned over the water's edge and dipped a hand into the water. The temperature was ice cold, like all the streams and lakes in Vermont tend to be, even at the warmest times of the year. But despite the coldness, she was eager to take a dip. But please, God, don't let anybody be watching her. Before Candy could change her mind, she ripped off her clothes in a moment of impulsive boldness and then jumped boldly into the water like she had done so many times before as a young girl. The water was freezing, icy cold, but she was in and out of the water faster than a shaggy dog that had retrieved a stick for its owner. Candy stood there shivering, trying to dry off before she put her clothes back on. She had thoroughly enjoyed the swim. It was invigorating, but the water had been freezing. Suddenly she felt rather self-conscious, as if someone was watching her. She knew that someone was there. She could feel eyes burning into her skin. But when she looked around and about herself, she could see nothing there. But the unsettling feeling of being watched seemed to persist. She privately wondered if some person who decided to embark on the woodland trail had been spying on her surreptitiously, in her vulnerable state. But she reasoned with herself that it had been a risk well worth taking, for it had been so invigorating going for that swim. It had been like the old days. She began to make her way back down the woodland trail, back to her bicycle in the car park, and as she did, once again she sensed she was not alone, and that someone was following her. But she felt like a fool when she turned around to look at the trees, for there was no sign of anyone around her. Everything felt benign, but there was something about the woods today that made her feel rather disquieted and on edge, but she didn't know what it was. It was over lunch that afternoon that Candy decided to share her bizarre, rather outlandish experience with her parents. It would seem Mary Seacourt had not stopped spoiling Candy since she'd come out of prison. The lunch that day was no exception to this rule. The family was enjoying roast chicken, biscuits, gravy, roasted potatoes, creamed spinach and butternut squash, which was to be followed by a delicious fruit pavlova. Mrs. Seacourt filled tall glasses with iced homemade lemonade and looked at her daughter inquiringly. "Why do I get this funny feeling? Something is weighing heavily on your mind, love," she said, handing her daughter a heavily loaded plate of steaming hot food, which Candy took from her appreciatively. "Mum, this looks amazing. I'm starving hungry." "Well, you always are, darling. Please do tuck in." Candy's father looked up at Candy briefly, after he'd taken a sip of his lemonade. He began to quickly tuck into his roast dinner. "You do look a little flustered, love. You haven't had a run-in with Becca, have you? Please, God, no." "No, it's not that. It's just I went on the woodland trail again today, as I do every single morning. But something didn't feel right today. Something was strange in the wood grove." Mary looked up at her daughter in surprise. "What do you mean by that, darling? What does something didn't feel right actually mean?" "Well, something was off, wasn't it? If you must know, I decided to take a swim in the stream. I used to swim there a lot as a girl. I wanted to do it again. I had an impulse to swim in the stream. But I didn't have my swimming costume with me, did I? So I stripped down naked, and I went for a quick skinny dip. I was literally in and out in the water. I'd never have the courage to do that until I went to prison. Seeing the stream with all my childhood memories gave me a yearning just to take a quick dip. But I was worried that the moment I got into the water stark naked, someone on the trail would likely see me." "Good for you, love," said her mother. "I admire your plucky courage for taking the plunge like that. I dare say I wouldn't have the same confidence to strip down naked, as I'm pretty sure as soon as I did, someone would appear from nowhere. But besides anything else, that water is notorious for being freezing cold all year round, so you were very brave to get into it." Candy's father didn't look impressed by Candy's revelation. "You shouldn't have been going swimming naked, love. You're on your own, for goodness sake. And taking a dip along a hiking trail at a stream commonly used by regular folk is not a good idea. Anyone could potentially have stumbled on you on the trail and seen you in such a vulnerable position. I don't like the thought of that one little bit. You're an attractive young lady, and you can't be sure that some pervert might take the opportunity to spy on you or something."
Your father's right, love, now that I come to think of it. I know he's very overprotective of you, like any father is towards his daughter. But I do think he's right. Taking a skinny dip on your own isn't the wisest thing for you to do. Had you been in company, that might have been a different thing altogether. Tell me about this off feeling you experienced.
Well, it only started when I began swimming in the stream. I really did feel as if someone was watching me. That's why I decided to mention it.
You see, what did I tell you? Said Candy's father. Someone was watching you. You felt that they were. Because they probably were. Someone was probably there having a good old gawk at you, hoping to get a look at you without your clothes on. I'm afraid there are some very perverse people out there. And my advice to you, love, is don't ever do this again. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Oh, I do, Dad, and you're probably right. I know it sounds crazy, but when I felt watched, everything in the woods went completely quiet. That was why it was so creepy for me. It was like the atmosphere changed at once. That's never happened to me before. And I've been to that wood grove so many times during my lifetime.
Goodness gracious me, said Candy's mother. Peter Bolton, who's a great friend of your father's, who plays bridge with him. He experienced a similar foreboding feeling in the grove himself, didn't he, darling? Said Candy's mother, looking over at her father. Oh, I don't think you should go there, love, said Candy's father, giving his wife a why did you have to bring this up kind of look. His expression suggested he was hiding something that he didn't want to share with Candy. But Candy could read her father like a book, and so her curiosity was naturally aroused. Mr. Seacourt looked slightly awkward for a brief moment. He lifted his glass of lemonade to his lips and took a hearty swig, and then said to his wife, You don't want to alarm Candy with all that nonsense. Besides, you know Peter Bolton. He probably made the entire story up, did he not? It sounded like utter baloney to me. Absolute nonsense. I didn't believe a word of it myself. But I will say one thing about the man. He's got one hell of an imagination.
So there we are. That is the end of part 3. Part 4 is tomorrow night, and I look forward to you joining me then. Until next time, goodbye and good night.